All right. So thank you, everyone, and welcome for joining this rescheduled meeting of the Labor, Education, Workforce, and Youth Development. We are broadcasting live on Hartford Public Access Television, Hartford Public Access Facebook Live, Comcast Xfinity Channel 96, and the rebroadcast will be uploaded on HPA-TV's website as well as the YouTube website. So today we're having a rescheduled meeting so to allow the opportunity for the director of Department of Children, Youth, Family and Recreation to present and provide us an update on after school activities and early childhood activities. The reason why this is important and why we rescheduled this meeting is that we're facing a crucial time here in the city of Hartford and as well as across the nation where we're starting to see upticks in terms of coronavirus outbreaks, and our city is the same. And so what we're hoping for and what will be provided today is Miss Oliver's update on those efforts. So hopefully, Miss Oliver, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. So I am already frozen on this video.
It's okay, but we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. All right, so I'm clicking that off, so hopefully I don't lose connection. So hello, everyone. Good to see everyone this Friday evening. And I'm going to share, it's probably going to be a little meatier on the side of early care and early learning. And part of that is because we're going to talk about the impact of COVID. So what I'm going to do is give some information. I'll start there in terms of early care and early learning, and then go into some of the work that's happening in terms of recreation, in terms of after school and also weekends, and give you a slight update about some of the work that we're doing in partnership with the Hartford Public School System in terms of learning sites across the city. So with that being said, just to ground the conversation as a reminder, when I talk about the larger system of childcare, what I'm talking about is the mix of kinship care. So, you know, your family that takes care of your kids, your family child care providers who are small businesses that work out of their homes, our early learning centers, which many more of us are a little bit more familiar with in our community. So like our CRTs, our women's leagues, our Hartford neighborhood centers, et cetera. And then of course we have our school districts that also take care of this age population as well. So what we do in my department is we staff the Mayor's Cabinet for Young Children, which helps to really lift up and boost the child care system in the city of Hartford. And we are also the administrators of some key grants that come through for the state, which include the School Readiness Grant, which is about $10.5 million annually that comes through to the city. And then another about $1.23 million for what's called the Child Daycare Grant. And the majority of that money is actually sent out to our providers, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Overall, the impact of COVID-19 has basically exposed and exacerbated the disparities and vulnerabilities that already existed in the system. Most notably, financial stability and sustainability has definitely become towards financial instability. So again, those also the other disparities that you had in terms of families and in terms of digital disparities, whether with devices or the internet, et cetera. Food insecurities, housing, all those other types of things, which is parent supports and stress. Again, these things already existed and we know that, but it just helped to really highlight them and to make them worse. So I mentioned in our system, the School Readiness Network is 16 providers in total across the city, which includes ourselves as an operator of 3 small centers. And in total, that covers 1,455 children or so. Now, that number is our total number max, and that's what we target to actually serve. I'll mention a little bit later as well. Enrollment right now is much lower than that, much lower than that. And the way that these businesses work is that is based on children coming into the centers. So if children are not coming, you're not receiving that revenue, which has really caused a lot of our partner organizations to have to take a look at whether or not they can really operate their business. Some are beginning to make some very tough decisions around staffing. Many of them have lost staff, et cetera. And so again, that number of being almost 1,500 children to much less than that, which is, by the way, not unique to Hartford. This is across the state of Connecticut as well as across the country, has really taken a huge hit. So that's the School Readiness Network. The Family Child Care Network, what we have done in Hartford is we were able to really take advantage of the relationship that two of our employees had coming from Casa de Puerto Rico, who established like 20 years of relationships and brought with them these providers. And although we had a formal program around a food program for these providers, we informally were providing them support. This past spring and summer, through support with the state and others, we have been able to formalize that network. And right now we're working with 64 different providers, most of which about 42 of them are actually directly in Hartford, and some of them are at the edges of Hartford because, as you guys know, people sometimes go across the line to Bloomfield or East Hartford. And those providers right now are serving about 240 children, but really have the capacity to serve over 500 children. So again, we're seeing a lower enrollment, but this group has been so critical because this was the group that was able, for the most part, to stay open the entire time. They never closed. So this was the group that a lot of our essential workers, working parents, et cetera, continued to have their children going to and never stopped all the way through. When I look at some of the other updates for you guys that I want to share is what has the state been doing in relation to this? The state has really put out a number of targeted short-term programs that vary from providing financial support to businesses and technical assistance to PPE for program providers, to nursing support in terms of general nursing support, et cetera. And so the state has tried to really step it up and provide these and address immediate needs, I should say. They also took a look at how we are reimbursing our providers in some of our programs, including the School Readiness Network. As I mentioned, if a child does not come, you can't get reimbursed for that child. That continues to be the case. And what they've done, though, is they said, okay, we know you're not able to fill a whole classroom, so we're going to do what they call class size equivalents, et cetera. So they've been trying to assist with this issue because they're obviously very aware that the system could collapse, even though it's so crucial to our working parents. And then another point really quick with the state, what they've done is they put out a lot of waivers and guidance around COVID-19, which has been wonderful. It's a lot of information. But what's really been important about those waivers is things of it was time for you to get your accreditation, for you to be able to get things like extensions, to understand that it's going to take longer right now for somebody to get their paperwork back for certain processes, whether it's licensing and background checks, et cetera. And they also are willing to put their dollars around some of this as well, which has been helpful. Locally, and we have certain different levels, and I mentioned them a little bit earlier. From like the school district's perspective, most of you guys know our districts are moving to orange status. So Hartford Public Schools moved to orange status. What that meant for our preschoolers, for the most part, is they are staying in person for the most part. So there's a little difference in terms of Montessori and a couple of those models, but that was really important and an important decision that the superintendent made of Hartford Public Schools. Correct, as many of you guys may know, is that they're actually only doing remote learning the week after Thanksgiving, as an example, in order to really mitigate any risk and spread of COVID-19 due to family gatherings around the actual holiday. Other quick things that have happened in terms of Head Start and early Head Start, that's now with CREC in partnership with Catholic Charities and the Village for Families and Children, and really continuing to build. That's a newer contract for them. But again, those families are the same families we're going to see from our previous operators. I mentioned the School Readiness Network, and then the Family Child Care Network. One of the wonderful things about if there is some type of silver lining in terms of this emergency, besides just understanding how important the child care system is to all of us, it's really been how important these providers are. These providers have not, they've received support from the state in the past, but really definitely not at this level that they've received. And one of the things that I want to share with you guys when we talk about updates is how is the funding for general funds, the additional funds approved by council members, how we've been able to utilize that. So for early learning in particular, we were able to say we're going to leverage those funds along with some grant dollars that we received and actually have a dedicated employee that works with these family child care providers. So you might have remembered earlier, I mentioned that we were able to take advantage of the fact that there were these 20+ year relationships. I actually met the family child care providers in February, right before the emergency was called, in person, and was able to go to an amazing meeting, et cetera. But we had our employees doing it off the side of their desk, trying to be supportive. Like, for example, a couple of providers that called me and said, "Hey, Kim, we would love to get in person." And I was like, "Great, we have Arroyo. Why not go over to Arroyo?" And so that's what we did. Had a meeting, brought some pizza, talked about some key issues and how we could be helpful. That's been a really critical piece because when we go back to the springtime, when the early learning centers were also closed, in addition to the school systems going to remote, these were the providers that, again, those families could depend on. Because when I look at my network in terms of the School Readiness Network, most of the providers were closed for a significant portion of time during the spring. Some of them tried to stay open, tried their hardest, and just was not able to for a variety of reasons. Ourselves at the city, we were closed to our families for a couple of weeks, and then we reopened and was able to participate for a special program connected to essential workers and also healthcare workers, and kept a couple of our centers open. But for the most part, our families, working families, didn't have a place to turn to, and they were able to turn to these providers. So with that, and I mentioned this leverage of these other funding, some funding from the state, also some funding that we're looking to secure from one of our foundations. We've been able to give them support in terms of technical assistance, but not just in a broad way. I think one of the wonderful things that the state has done is provide workshops and webinars and things like that, but it's not that one-on-one consulting. Some of the feedback that we've received from our providers have been that it's really, really confusing. So remember that these are small business owners. So when the PPP loans were going on, they were looking at the paperwork, and quite honestly, some of them shared with me and our team that they just looked at the stack of paperwork and it was overwhelming and decided not to do it. Also, about 90% or so of the providers that we work with are bilingual, and many of them prefer to communicate in Spanish. And one of the great things about my team is bilingual and has been really able to work with the providers directly, and also, amongst themselves decide which way they want to communicate, et cetera. We've been able to also not just make sure that it's safe for these providers, but also that the quality of care they're receiving is continuing to be of a high level. So, for example, You guys may remember it was council from last year that actually approved us receiving a grant from Bloomberg Philanthropies as part of their What Works Cities initiative for about $450,000 over 3 years. Well, in addition to working with our early learning centers, we're actually working with our family child care providers. And what they've been able to do is we had a plan, for example, to work with about 10 to 15 of them, actually working with them right now. And we immediately got to 25 because these providers, many of them have been doing this 20, 30 years. They know what they're doing, highly intelligent, so smart folks, but have not always gotten those supports. So we've been able to really expand in that area. That's been this crucial area that we witnessed for ourselves, what was going on. The other thing that I'll mention, last thing on the family child care providers for now, is they also have their own family. So remember, they're running their businesses out of their home in a time of COVID. So one of the issues is if they're taking care of other people's children, they couldn't get out to the grocery stores for their own families. So remember, the grocery stores were closing early, all the different stores. And so we were doing food bag drop-offs to them and to some of our other families across the city, but really also talking to them. I mentioned the financial support in terms of these loans are available, are you connected with them, what information do you need, et cetera. And then also from a health and safety perspective, if a child is sick at one of these sites, again, this is a home of someone's home. So this is not as simple as we're going to shut down and do some deep cleaning, et cetera. This is literally where someone lives. So really walking through what are those health and safety protocols that make sure not only are they keeping the children safe that they serve, but themselves safe and their families. So that's some of those supports that are built into the family child network with the general funds. So our $100,000 for early learning was specific to the Family Child Care Network. But the Family Child Care Network, again, is part of that larger structure I mentioned a little bit earlier. And I had some other information, but I'll just leave with the last mention of just a couple of challenges and opportunities across, and then give you guys a chance if you want for some questions and answers on this portion, is that our providers are open right now. Many of them, as I mentioned earlier, are struggling, are talking about what their financial future looks like. Some of them are laying people off. They've lost staff, a lot of staff. Some because of their own personal decision, underlying medical conditions, didn't want to work with families right now. And a lot of people who are very scared. Morale right now has been okay, but is beginning to lower again because of fear in the community. However, this is also a group that, again, has been doing this for many, many years and know the families. And we ourselves just, did an informal survey asking parents, okay, well, what would you be interested? Would you be interested in doing hybrid? Would you be interested in doing remote learning versus all in person? And parents were very clear to us, they want in-person services. And they said to us, even if I don't bring my child every single day, I need the option to be able to bring my child to a place that's safe. The parents also share with us, because again, these are preschoolers, that when you do remote learning, and we know this, but it's worth saying, it's really family learning or family engagement at that point, because many times you're not going to be in a situation where that child will be on their own. A lot of the activities are based on some type of interaction with an adult. And some of the remote learning that we've seen earlier has been not technology based, but more like packets and activities, et cetera. So one of the things that parents also said was, hey, if we have to do that, okay, maybe twice a week and no more than an hour a day. So it tells you just in terms of where they are. So they're valuing in-person services right now and really looking to the providers to stay and keep their doors open. And even though if you close a facility because you need to do a deep cleaning, people have to quarantine, et cetera, due to a COVID-related incident, for the most part, the families are staying. You definitely may lose a couple here or there because those couple of weeks you're closed. People have to find other options, quite frankly. But we are seeing that the parents who stay are staying for the long haul, but we're definitely seeing ourselves at lower enrollment. I think that I guess I'll leave it there for now in terms of early learning. There's some other, and I have a couple of slides that I can share with the council members and with the and maybe made public later. That may be helpful, but it goes into a little bit more detail in terms of some of the things that we've been working on in terms of center-based care versus family child care, et cetera. So I guess I'll pause at this moment and see if anybody has any questions.
Sure. So first of all, Director, I want to thank you for this comprehensive update. I mean, it really just shows a multifaceted approach to supporting families during this pandemic and crisis. But I want to back up and acknowledge my colleagues. Councilwoman Bermudez is on the line, and so is Councilman James Sanchez. So I have some questions, but I'll leave the floor to Councilwoman Bermudez if you have some questions.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, all right. Yes, thank you so much for that presentation. So that was so important and critical, especially where we are right now with the pandemic, and childcare was already, struggling before in terms of trying to get additional funds, and needing additional slots for parents, and yet, boom, the pandemic hit, and now it's, it is a disaster in terms of the amount of insecurity, both on the parent and family end, and also on the business owner end, which is, there's so many unknowns. But that being said, the presentation is super important because it gives us information as to how we can think about the upcoming budget cycle. And I know we can say, whoa, the budget cycle happened in the summer, but before you know it, in a couple of months, we're going to be looking at the budget again. And for me and for others, I know on council, we know that we want to make sure to allocate additional amounts of funding and resources where they are needed. And certainly, when we look at our early learning centers, when we look at our child care centers, it's a place that needs even more assistance, because we would hate to go into the future and then find ourselves in the city of Hartford having lost, 100 different locations that provide childcare. And as scary as that may sound, that's the reality is that, like you said, a lot of centers are closing. And so with that concept in mind of planning for the future and figuring out how much funds should we allocate from the city budget to go towards the vital resources that are early learning centers and also childcare centers, I have a couple of questions in mind. Okay. So the first one is there's the family childcare that's being run out of individuals' homes. Some of those are licensed providers and some of those are unlicensed providers. Some of them are through Care for Kids, some of them are not. And then there's the early learning centers, which you referenced, the CRTs and other sites throughout the city. And then there's a third category. And what was the third category that you mentioned?
I mentioned kinship care as well as the actual school districts, because the school districts also take care of preschoolers. And I'm saying districts with an S because of CREC as well, in addition to Hartford Public Schools. Okay. And a choice, quite frankly, yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that we saw play out, and again, this is always a communication game, right? Like information coming in, receiving certain funds, and then allowing and doing the job of communicating it with the community, with the constituents, with the business owners. And one of the things that I saw for instance, when the first stimulus care package rolled out, was that a lot, and when we're looking at, I'm generalizing right now, when we're looking at our overall business community, people were at a loss. They said, okay, I'm a small business owner. I want to apply for this PPP. I want to apply for this other funding that we're getting, that we could get. I don't know how to do that. So there was this confusion. And there's certainly some nonprofits that stepped up, and like International Hartford, when we're looking at the small business community within immigrants, and they stepped up and they said, okay, we're going to provide you one-on-one counseling. I guess my concern is what happens when there are pockets of business owners within the early learning field that are providers that may not necessarily be part of, let's say they're not part of the CSEA, SEIU, they're not members.
Yeah.
And so does your department have a running list of how to contact those individuals? Is that something that's available?
So I'm fortunate because I mentioned earlier, I happen to have employees who came from La Casa de Puerto Rico who had those relationships in the community. So when it comes to more of my southern part of the city, I would say the answer is yes. Where it's sometime in terms of the relationships may not be as strong as in the northern part of the city. However, with that said, I just want to mention, Councilwoman, you mentioned some being licensed and some not. The state holds firm in us working with licensed providers. So all of these providers I've mentioned are all licensed providers. So the state actually holds the list of all of the providers across the city, obviously across the state, but also the ones that may be on the fringes of the towns or surrounding towns. And so one of the things that we're able to do is not just do the cold calling, because again, I'm tapping into two ladies, especially one in particular, who's had the relationships, have the credibility, who's welcomed into each other's home. And they have their own, as you can imagine, professional network where they've been able to push that. So I mentioned this formal network where before informally, it was about 30 or so. The difference of the project I'm talking about now has only been in place for about maybe 2.5 months, maybe 3 at the most. And we went from about 30 or some that we knew and could call to now having 64. And so always work to do though, because I think like a lot of our work, and at least in my department, is so much based on relationships that it's like we definitely still have pockets. So I by no means want to ever say we've gotten it all, but we do focus on the licensed group. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And so that's one of the reasons we're able to have, if you will, a starting list for that. Knowing that there's definitely, especially if you get in the space of kinship care, where you're not going to have perhaps that connection with the state or, others, where it definitely, I would say, that information is not always available. So I think, you have a good point, Councilwoman.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because one of the things that we noted, and again, this is looking at the general just business population, how to get the word out, when, there was a specific grant available through the Hartford Foundation, how to get the word out for these small businesses. But thank you for clarifying that you work specifically with licensed providers. So, so your list went from 30 to 60, and how many licensed, what is I don't know if you have a hard number or an estimate, but what is the total number of licensed providers in Hartford?
It's so funny you're asking that, because I actually asked one of my team members to be like, oh, who's all the people on the list? And I will acknowledge that she did not give me that information, so I could follow up with you regarding that. I will tell you, again, we know that our network is strongest in the southern part of the city than it is in the northern part of the city. So in the southern part of the city, I have much more saturation, if you will, for the majority of our licensed providers. Whereas in the northern part of the city, not as much. That's what we were building. And I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons we were having an in-person meeting was that providers' request, because a lot of them, their work is at home, they stay at home, and they get so much out of these external networks. And they were bringing new people in to like these meetings. And then, of course, COVID hit. And, we have to kind of stop those meetings. So that was one of the key strategies that we thought of, being able to do that a little bit better. But I will definitely get that number to you, Councilwoman, and for everyone as part of the meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that would be important because if we look at it in terms of, what overlaps and what are some gaps, there are approximately like 500 providers in Hartford that are members of the union, of the state union for early childcare. But not everybody that is a provider, an early family childcare provider, is part of the union. And so if they're not part of the union, we want to make sure that business is able to receive the services through the city and the resources and all that comes with it, and the information that comes with it, as a vital lifeline for them. And as we're planning on City Council for our budget cycle, you had mentioned how you've been able to leverage the 100,000 and how you were able to secure some grant funding. I'm wondering how much in grant funding you were able to secure, and how much do you project that you will need for the next coming cycle?
So thus far, we've been able to secure, in partnership with the state initiative, about a little under 80,000 that runs us through to the remainder of this year. That's the grant that also comes with a lot of technical assistance and also a lot of PPE supplies, et cetera. We have also, in addition to that, have an application, and we've been having conversations in our application we're about to put in with the Hartford Foundation, that is about another $50,000. A lot of these dollars are being used to help support the professional services support. So how you were talking about, like we both were saying about, okay, you have these opportunities for applying for support, whether it be loans, and albeit most of our providers have said, I don't want a loan, I don't need another bill when all of this is over, I need some other type of support. But whether it's the loans or if it's business planning, et cetera, having that ability to have one-on-one and really supporting them. So that's been our ways. And the other thing I mentioned was the Bloomberg, where we had already secured those dollars, where what we did was open up a lot of those services to this network. So while I wouldn't put the dollar amount for that because it already existed, just wanting to acknowledge that the family childcare providers, this is the first year where that's been open to them. And I can follow up with you with a calculation on how much that value is, because they are participating and receiving some additional training and some technology and all that good stuff. I don't have that offhand. What I would say for the next budget cycle is, again, my folks were doing this off the side of their desk because they believe it's important, and it is to our families. But if we really want to make a difference here, we need to continue and having sustained support for having someone to work with them. And just to break it down, what we were able to do was that employee that had those relationships, and again, these are professional relationships, right? Was working on a different project where they were able to provide some food program support, et cetera, and would do some extra things. But we are required by that other program to ensure by the state that we are making sure that person is doing compliance work for that grant. So we officially can't combine those two roles just to stay in compliance with the state. So I go from having basically no one without the support that council provided. And quite frankly, if I hadn't again had this one person in particular, we would be at ground zero. There's no way we would have been able to do anything. We have lucked out so much here at the city of Hartford because we do have her working with us. And so I wouldn't be able to sustain what we're talking about, and not just in terms of the services and the supplies. And by the way, the PPE supplies continues to be an issue. A lot of the supplies they received in the summer have dried up, and they need more of those cleaning supplies. So that's an ongoing issue. But without having that $100,000 to be able to support that employee, I probably wouldn't be able to give the same level of support. And I will acknowledge that I'm concerned. We're getting these grants right now because of COVID, and I obviously hope that this time next year we're not going to be where we are right now, and so these grant dollars won't be available. So I'm really concerned about that. Another thing that I didn't bring up that it's a little bit different than the family child care providers is, as many of you know, the parents are required, if they're part of some of the programs, that they have to actually pay a portion, the parent fee, for services for early learning. And one of the things that we were able to do with the support from the mayor was to say, okay, we're not going to worry about parent fees during that springtime where things were a little bit crazy and people were losing their jobs and all the stuff we were trying to figure out. But we are required to have parent fees built into our programs. The reason I bring that up is because the way childcare is set up, the system, you never have really enough money for the operations, because our families, for the most part, are lower income families. So you're never like fully supporting that full slot. And if you have a parent, and many of them have lost their jobs and now not able to pay, they don't have access to the support. I think that's something for us to really to think about. Obviously, I hope that some other things are going to also happen so that we'll be able to have more about universal pre-K and things of that nature. But I think just know that even as we try to provide geographic access and access in so many other ways to our families, there is this fee also that they have to pay, whether they're going to a center-based care or if they're going to family child care out of someone's home, et cetera.
Okay, and I know my colleagues also have other questions, but I just have one other question,
Sure.
which is, of the 100K and the additional approximately 80,000 that you were able to leverage in grant funding, how much went to each provider? Like, how much of that was allocated per provider?
So the state
and I should also probably add, and how much would you have wished or hoped for?
Okay. So in terms of direct dollars, in terms of like say like cash, so the answer would be zero. Now, so let me explain why. So I mentioned the way we use our dollars in terms of paying for our person, et cetera. The state, I actually asked this question because I thought we would have the ability to have a pool of funds for like emergency uses, et cetera. The state did was say they made resources available. They now do have some mini grants, but prior they said, no, we prefer like you purchasing the PPE and then giving that out to the providers. Or, you know, like if we find that somebody needs some support in terms of nursing, securing that and then giving those services to providers. So in terms of the actual idea of like having an emergency pod, or how is it that we could split this and then give it to direct providers, that wasn't on the table. In terms of a wish list, the reason I was asking it, because I thought it was important for emergencies. I mentioned that if someone, first of all, business plans, again, I have people who've been in business forever, and I think these folks are some of the most brilliant people I've ever met. But a lot of them don't have business plans because they always are in it. They're always in it. They're always serving the children and the families. And so we wanted to be able to say, okay, how is it that we could work with you to say, if you need a business plan, but this other person needs something else, that you would be able to use those funds? Or, for example, the technology, knowing how much of a big deal that's been and how important it is, could, if you needed to strengthen your internet or have your laptop so you could do X, Y, and Z, having that built in. And as I mentioned, like I think personally that's important, because first of all, I have some type of flexible fund. I'm happy that the state is now doing mini grants. I believe I believe you might be able to get up to, it's not very much money. I was going to say $5,000, but actually I think it's $500. So it's very tiny dollars that will go very, very quickly. The other thing is, if you're sick and you do have to close down, or someone in your family is sick, or you're exposed, etc., there's no income coming in for those providers. So I have a lot of concerns around that. I could definitely follow up with this committee with something a little bit more concrete on paper for you guys, if that's helpful. But it is something that we did try to explore early on. And as I mentioned, was asked to kind of provide support in a different way, like us purchasing and then providing support.
Okay, thank you.
So, Director, thank you again, and Councilwoman, thank you for those great questions. So first, I'd like to start with, and maybe this is a naive question, what does the side of the desk mean, working off the side of the desk?
Okay. So this is when you have somebody that's committed and who loves what they do, and they get all of their other work done and then somehow squeeze in on that little edge, the side of their desk, doing phone calls and things like that. So this employee I mentioned, she was working on a different project that has a lot going to it, and she happens to be a superstar. So she was able to handle certain things and quickly, so that she could follow up with, let me check in with these providers and give them phone calls and see how they're doing, that kind of stuff. So yeah, but it's literally meaning you've done all the rest of your work.
And so here's a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess I've been working off the side of my desk all my career. So I'm gonna use that moving forward. Okay, so more specifically, in terms of, I think overall on a macro level approach, has there been any discussions or any grants or, in terms of resources and funds provided, a change in a thought process, particularly during COVID, in terms of reimbursement for student attendance? Meaning, instead of it being, it sounds like it's a per diem type of funding structure, instead of it being more like maybe a monthly, like you get this much for this month, regardless if that child attended 60% of the time, 70% of the time. I realize that attendance needs to be at some kind of a structure, but I think there needs to be a realization that folks aren't going to attend 100% of the time for various reasons. Has there been any discussion on that, maybe through the collaborative networks or the Office of Early Childhood at the state?
So there has. The way they don't do, it's not per diem, it is by month, but you have to have certain rules that, for example, if you have a child that came half a day and all that, it may be that at one point it wouldn't be considered a child fully there, and therefore you may not get dollars in funding for that child. The conversation that's been really important has actually been the enrollment conversation. So there's a lot of overhead for these businesses. You need to make sure these children are safe. There is qualified adults are in place. They have the right kind of furniture, lavatories, meals, etc. for this child. And because the overhead is what it is, that obviously the more kids you have, the better. So when you start pulling back, and I mentioned that enrollment is low, and in some cases lower than 50%, then what's happening is I have no choice. I have to go and say, I have 2 qualified adults in this classroom, but today 3 kids showed up. I still have those costs. And quite frankly, more costs now, because some of the providers have shared that their costs have increased 20% for their cleaning supplies and services. I know for a period of time between the spring and summer, my nursing contract doubled for that short amount of time over what would have been usually over a year. So the answer is yes. And just today I learned that the state redid their formula on how to do for school readiness grants, because what was happening before was usually a classroom is going to be about 18 children, 20 children or so, right? And the state was saying, following health guidelines, you need to bring down your class size. So automatically you're telling a provider you can't even have as many kids. So what the state did was say, okay, we're going to use this formula of what they call equivalence, so that instead of saying all 20 kids have to show up, if at least 11 kids showed up, I'm going to give you credit for that entire classroom. There were some things in the formula that what they shifted today was the denominator for the classroom was still 20 though. So what would happen is you would still kind of do the multiplication, and you still, in a sense, would need 20 kids. They adjusted the formula today to be based on that approved group size of 16. So that's going to be able to increase some of the funding that's going to our providers, which is really, really good news. They also did provide what they call the 25% supplement to providers, so that, again, they were expecting some of the low enrollment, but also, like I said, this increase in overhead due to multiple things like the cleaning and PPE, et cetera. So they put the 25% supplement. The downside to that is the supplement is still part of what you were awarded anyway, right? So let's say you push to try to, you were supposed to get, 16 children, and you pushed, so you can now have 16 children in that classroom. Well, this 25% supplement doesn't apply to you because you got to the old target of the 16. So they've been trying definitely to move. I think it's an ongoing conversation. I can tell you in conversations with our providers just this week, it's a very, very tough time. The other thing I will want to also acknowledge the state has done is go from, they're willing to put the cash up front and allow for cash flow, a positive cash flow, versus doing a monthly reimbursement methodology. That is new to the space as well. I think that's really important. It's still somewhat based on, it's a little complicated. I will get into those details. A little complicated. Like it's not a situation where we can say, hey, for the year, we know this is $1 million. Let's go ahead and give you the $1 million so you can get everything set up, and then we'll reconcile at a certain point in the year. It's still kind of in certain chunks, but there definitely has been movement. But it's been really, really tough. I mean, one of the other things that I know that people have brought up, though, that has not changed, just in case you have opportunity for conversation, in terms of what I'm aware of, is these movements have been connected to the the school readiness grant, the child daycare grant. There's a working requirement connected to that. So a lot of parents lost their jobs. But if I'm now trying to get a new job and I still needed the childcare, I may no longer be considered eligible. So that's an area where I'm not aware of that being changed. And I know that is a concern. And that's where you're going to see more of our infant toddler care, which is our highest demand care with the lower number of slots that we have across the city. So I think that that's pretty important, especially given what's happened to just the job market over the past few months. That one's critically important. So the state has definitely tried to move some things. One of the things that I've been doing is with the mayor's cabinet, and that's co-chaired, of course, by the mayor and also the superintendent, making sure these type of issues also get to them. I can share some of those some of those bullet points with you as well, because it speaks to some of these issues around funding. So again, Commissioner Bai and her team, they've definitely been working on it, and I'm really happy for it. It's just that we're in a really tough time that we're still not completely making it there. But really appreciate their efforts though. But I'll send you some other bullet points regarding
Thank
that.
you. So in terms of how has Care for Kids been working? I've heard from constituents that a mixed bag. So I've heard that it's been expedited fast and efficiently, while others I heard that it's been taking a long time. What is your viewpoint on the
Care for Kids?
Yeah, for Care for Kids, when families apply for Care for Kids and it going to the providers?
So for us, and I may want to ask a question one of my colleagues and get back to you. It's kind of the same. So the reason for this is Care for Kids was being hit hard the last 2 years. So when they were like closing the roles and reducing the roles, it was a struggle for a lot of our parents in the last few years. So I think similar to other issues as it relates to COVID just highlighted some stuff that was already a problem. Again, a lot of our population, definitely not all, because school readiness fits in that space of you're working, but maybe you're maybe on that sliding scale of like lower income to mid income. These parents are definitely, we're receiving Care for Kids. We still receive it. It's moving. But like I said, the hit for us that I observed would have been last year, the last 18 months. But I'll definitely inquire that specific question across the network.
Thank you. And then last one. So I heard you mention a couple times that the South End seems to have more centers and support and just providers overall in general, and that the North End is not as much. Is there any plan in place to create a base in the North End at all? Or is that tabled right now because of the pandemic and outreach efforts are limited?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I was talking about the family childcare providers in that regards, because geographically, when you start going to the South, and as you guys probably know, that there's definitely spots there, but I wouldn't say that it has full coverage. I think there's some opportunities there as well. The plan was a pause a bit. I mentioned that meeting, the in-person meeting. I literally had some of our providers speak to me directly and say, "Oh my goodness, this was great. I'm going to bring this person, this person, this person to the next meeting." And that meeting was in mid-February, and we weren't able to do another meeting. One of the other things that is a big conversation is the infant toddler care piece, because a lot of these providers also take care of infant toddler, which is so important, because I mentioned earlier, by far the lowest amount of slots, our highest demand. One of the downsides of COVID at one point, I have to say, is that we saw some open slots in infant toddler, which never happened. And fortunately, we were able to take care of that, but there's always a huge wait list. So I want to really be able to ramp that piece up again. So one of the things that the team is looking at is how do we have a little bit more balance in the city? Like I said, I'm able to tap into somebody who had the relationships because of La Casa de Puerto Rico, which was a little bit more of a southern part of the city. But we definitely have north providers, but we need to continue the work. We're going to have to just do it a different way. And it's not as simple as, one of the things we did was everybody talks about virtual and how simple it is to go to for a lot of people, it's not that simple. I will say, though, we've had a lot of success with Zoom. So to all of the providers and staff, when we had to work at it, though. It was difficult. It was not this easy thing. So just because something's available virtual, it doesn't always work for our providers. And so that in-person piece is so important. And we're just not able to do that part as much. But you have me thinking, though, Councilman. So we may have to do something a little bit differently. But
and I would just say, whatever partnerships or support, I would extend my office. I'm sure Councilwoman Bermudez, whatever we can do in terms of networks and
Okay.
provide, we're here
Absolutely.
to partner. So just, don't hesitate to reach out.
That's great. That's wonderful, actually.
So with that being said, I know it's a Friday night. We do have the second bullet point on the agenda, and about the after school program. Yes, Councilwoman Bermudez.
Can I ask one last question? I guess it kind of ties to school, but looking at our not just early learning centers, looking at childcare in general. Understanding that right now, a lot of providers are taking in regular school-age children and not just infant and toddlers to accommodate the hybrid model that's happening.
Yes.
Are there any resources from the state or wherever else that you know of that are being assigned to those providers who have regular school-age children, so that, because not only are they caring for the infant and toddlers, now you have like 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds who need to do actual schoolwork. And so are there any resources available to those providers?
So definitely not as much. So school readiness, once you're considered ready for kindergarten, that cuts off. So to your point, you could be a school readiness provider, whether it's a center or perhaps you're part of another program. Once you're ready for kindergarten, it kind of cuts off. One of the things that we actually have been looking at is, and it's not with our family child care providers, it's with our community-based organizations, hosting like learning sites across the city. And they're with our larger multi-site organizations that are licensed by OEC. So it's Catholic Charities, Boys and Girls Clubs, CRT, YMCA, YWCA. Again, based on their licensing status and the fact that their facilities they have facilities that are not just based in the schools. And through that, working with the mayor's office, securing what looks to be right now $1.4 million to go out to those CBOs to support working families, again, who are lower income side of working families who need that type of support. But to your point, Councilwoman, in terms of like if it's their family child care provider, because they've been able to do school age for some time, and a lot of that is based on the parents' ability to pay. There's definitely not as much programs because our system is based for the most part on the concept of, oh, you're in school. So maybe this is a good segue, I guess, Councilman, to our next thing. It's like, but you're in school now. We know a lot of prior to COVID, our family child care providers would be providing like before care and after care, right? So, oh, your child gets dropped off, at so-and-so's home because the school is out, but the parent's not going to be able to pick up until 6 p.m. A lot of that still has been based on the parents. And I think it goes back to a larger conversation of how we just fund this system overall. And I know that's a little bit more of a policy conversation because dependent upon parents, but when your parents are, we talk about the Alice report, I think it's a great example from United Way, where you're working and, you're considered, asset constrained and all of that because you're working and trying to pay the bills and barely can do that. And now having to put out additional dollars for childcare. it's a strain mostly felt on the parents that then translate to our providers. So very limited resources there, in just acknowledging that.
Okay, great. So as part of our budget discussions, the council, in terms of allocations, I believe Councilwoman Bermudez, it was back in June, right? It seems like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Goodness. So the thought process around this 155K was a partnership to help with the superintendent's district model of excellence and the need for all, or the move for all schools to be community schools. And there were specifics aligned to that, where we wanted to earmark monies to help provide after school activities and support to the schools through a partnership with the Parks and Rec. Obviously, we are in a different time frame now, but Director Oliver, if you can give us an update just on partnerships in general with schools, and then specifically about the 155.
Yeah, so we are definitely in a different time. I just want to acknowledge that. I was able to give you this really robust update in terms of early learning. And here it's going to be a much thinner update. But I'll give an example. And part of this was geography. And what we were hoping to do was to strengthen some of the models that existed prior, but even just last year, there were children who were at WISH, which is considered a full, tier, I think I'm going to be a 4, but tier 3/4 community school coming to Parker Memorial and actually being able to go to Parker, have activities, have academic enrichment. That partnership with WISH is also with the village, and honestly, the Catholic Charities, we were planning on doing something there, and before everything kind of blew up, because that was in the spring of last year, and actually expand that. We've had basically 2 models that we do where the child can either come to recreation because it works. It might be that you're really close to a school, or in terms of a location. It doesn't always have to be a rec center, because we'll go into the outdoors when it makes sense, especially in terms of our parks and our playgrounds and things like that. So we have what I call that version, which is almost like a mobile recreation. And we also, I'm sorry, I've confused. I'm combining them together. It is one where the child basically comes to us, and one where the second one where we go to the child. So we also had the other models where we would go to that school, actually have in particular, I'm thinking about in Rawson and Sands, the kids are learning fundamentals in terms of playing around in the gym, doing stuff around teamwork, et cetera, et cetera. So our plan was to be able to expand both of those. And the reason for both is because we, in some cases, have, really a great center right around the corner where we can also do swimming. We don't have to worry about being out of the building at a certain time, et cetera. We're able to take advantage of the parks, et cetera. But there's also something that's really important about a child sometimes being able to stay in part of the school. And I know you both are familiar with those programs, because it's easier for the family. It's not as disruptive for the child. You're able to build relationships directly with the principal, which we've done in the past. I will acknowledge that we are off track with and maybe off track is not the right word, but it's been pended to some degree, because a lot of what we're seeing right now is there's some virtual work that's going on with the community school model right now. Some of it very, successful and working. In some cases, trying to have that hybrid or blended mix where you're also doing in person. So a lot of our work thus far this year really hasn't been an extension to the school. We did work in the summer where we were out in the parks, of course, in the splash pads, doing Zumba with families, having the summer camps and things like that that weren't directly attached to the schools. And honestly, with this hope, fingers crossed that things were going to get better in terms of the pandemic, and it just hasn't. but we are still in conversation. I will tell you, with Hartford Public Schools in particular, the loss of Nicole Porter no longer being there as a key partner, that has also impacted us more recently. It's helpful for me as a board member because I'm able to have some other conversations in terms of some other planning as it's connecting to like what the superintendent's vision is, whether it's around community schools or if it's around in terms of the middle school sports, which you really wanted to be able to expand upon this year. That was completely stopped by COVID. So I just did want to acknowledge that we had some momentum going, and it kind of it feels like it screeched to a halt. I will say at the same time, more recently has had some conversations with some members connected to PrAC and some of our other youth sports, and we're going to be moving forward with like a coming together as like a youth sports council, doing some other work with PrAC and just seeing what is it that we can do. We've seen some success definitely in terms of our own work, in terms of virtual, but a lot of our work we were expecting to do in person. So that's where we are right now.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And again, like we said earlier, whatever we can do to help, as they say in Spanish, a la orden, just please reach out and whatever myself and I'm sure Councilwoman Bermudez as well. I do have a couple questions. So has there any, I know that you guys were probably tremendously impacted by Arroyo. And what I mean by that, Arroyo Center is the #1 center in terms of COVID testing. I mean, with the rapid testing, that is something that folks from Hartford and outside of Hartford are really taking advantage of. And I'm super thrilled about that. But the negative piece about that is that we don't have access to Arroyo. So can you tell me about access at Parker? And if there's any thoughts or ideas around Parker in order to build something there.
Yeah, so Parker right now, and the information I'm going to share with you right now is available also on MyRec, so hartfordct.myrec.com. It is, you have to make a reservation, but you're able to make a reservation, and then that way you're able to come visit the building. This is very different. Then obviously, as you guys know, we always had open doors. You could just come in, you could just show up. Yep, you sign in, but then as you're good. Now you're definitely going through a check-in protocol that includes a checklist, doing things like temperature, and many other protocols that you're probably familiar with at this point. But really knowing that there's only so many people that we're going to allow in the building, and also utilize our facilities. In terms of on the younger side of things, the gym is available. We do have a developmental group in terms of our basketball that they've been working in there, but you are able to reserve. We also have it for the swimming as well. For younger people, it gets a little tougher because obviously if you're doing like lane-based or like lap swim, that's usually more of an adult kind of thing. But we do have, believe it or not, you socially distance in the pool, but you do have a couple of things you can do in terms of a larger group. So we have that available. The spaces where usually we saw a lot of kind of, I call them our lounges, our lobbies, where you saw like a lot of fellowship, playing chess and checkers. More recently, we were testing out reopening some of those spaces because they were closed because we had a lot of conjugation in those spaces and it needed to clear some of that out. So imagine where you would have the pool table, the foosball, and the number of people walking through there. So we were testing a little bit of that space in Parker. What the room that is closed, and this would have been true as well at Arroyo, is the weight room is closed. That is an adult room for the most part. Anyhow, usually you have to be over 18 years old, but that is closed, and that has a lot to do with, as you guys know, the sweat. You have to keep that space uber clean, and it just, the risk is much higher, and we didn't feel comfortable with that space. So with these measures, taking place, it's definitely a lower amount of traffic. Some of that is definitely by design, quite frankly. We don't want as many people in the building. What the difference in terms of Arroyo, and similar to you, Councilman, I feel strongly like we want to be able to provide the rapid tests site. But it did in terms of numbers. Would we have been able to offer something similar over at Arroyo? The answer is yes. And it is that moment of that balancing act, right? Where it's like we need to make sure our Hartford residents are safe and taking that. One of the things that we also, though, continue to try to do, obviously not going to be as successful in the fall as it's in the summer, was taking advantage of our parks. So like in the summer, pull park right around that space and things like that. But I will acknowledge we had a smaller number of people who utilized the pool over at over at Arroyo. Obviously, the gyms are always utilized. They definitely have felt the difference. The other thing that's happened as the numbers have uptick and the governor has, updated some of those executive orders, and then also what we're seeing as best practices as part of the Connecticut Recreation and Parks Association, they're becoming more and more that the sports, even though things like basketball was more in that medium to risk level, where they're asking to pull back. Many of you probably know that, officially high school winter sports are closing. And so even our basketball work are for the kids teams that we had where they were doing some skill development and play. That's the first week of December. And at this point, we really are going to have to assess whether or not it's safe to continue. But bottom line, to be able to, and by the way, I did not say this in my apologies. When we say the gym and you have to reserve, the concept is you reserve half the court. So it's not as if one person or a group has the whole space. It was only the half court. And again, that was the idea of trying to provide more opportunities for folks given the situation. But like I said, it is an impact, because I know you guys know these spaces. People who ran to the gym in particular, that was a really hot spot, especially in the evening, throughout the entire year. So
thank you for that. So in terms of sports being shut down completely, was it just high school or what is your how do you view that that governor's order in terms of all sports being shut down? Because I'm hearing that it was just the high school sports.
Yep.
But is it all sports?
So his order was in relation to high school winter sports. What we also have is certain sports that are considered higher risk. So, for example, wrestling is off the table. And admittedly, most of our kids weren't wrestling, but that one is considered extremely high risk. We're not doing that sport. I mentioned to you basketball. Basketball falls in the medium place, because right now, from a space of recreation, you can play basketball with your mask on. So, no, that's that has definitely changed. It went from everybody's masked up on the sidelines. Our kids that are playing, you could do it, and it's very hard to socially distance the huddle and stuff like that. And that's some of the stuff that was happening. So again, with a mask on, you can play basketball. But it definitely
the kids must love that. The kids
I know. That's why I'm saying, I was like, with the mask. So what we do is we abide by basically the policies, and I mentioned that. So we're a member, of course, of Connecticut Recreation and Parks Association, and look at how also they're interpreting the guidelines, as well as we're having direct conversations with Leonie Arroyo, our HHS director. And one of the things that we've been able to do, we're trying to finish up our last couple of weeks for the kids, because we want to still have opportunities. And part of that is because we have a paid staff that their job is to monitor. And they've also been trained in these health and safety protocols. But we do have to look at multiple things. So we are trying to be informed by the governor's executive order that even though officially it didn't say all sports, it makes us take a look at it, going to best practices across the state. And there's also groups across the country. I will say the winter sports one. I'll give it an example that's closer to like our swimming. When the swimming stuff came out, and this was in the summertime, USA Swimming came out with a full report and diagrams on how you can social distance or not inside of a pool. So we're looking at all of these different things to come up with the best way and the safest way that we can practice, and kind of overlaying all that with the local advice that we're getting. So yeah, so right now it is high school sports, is my understanding, high school winter sports for now, that were called off. But yeah, it's probably going to be a little uncomfortable for our kids if they want to play anything right now because of the mask. But officially, my understanding is that they could still play.
So my last one, I know. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and this meeting. But I think it's just important, particularly as things spike up. Folks are continuing to ask about early childhood, ask about the kids, and rightfully so in terms of our community. So the other piece is we talked a little bit about the young kids, and we're talking about the students and children. I wanted to ask about families. I know that there's a family center at Parker. Has that been running, and how is that going?
So what we have right now with Catholic Charities is it is modified operations, but they are there now. During the summertime, because of the way our summer hours work with Parker, it's always a little bit funkier anyhow, but we actually have it running. What you do not see is what Catholic Charities would do is really great events like Dinner and a Story. We have an agreement with them, like those type of events where our parents and our kids were coming out, obviously in larger groups. No, we can't do that. However, we did feel it was important, especially the case management work that goes on there, to be able to meet directly one-on-one with residents, and that, the point of Parker being there was so that residents will have access to the family center. So that is open right now, and it goes by appointment. So again, you're not going to see a traffic of people coming. It's more so they have an appointment to meet with somebody from Catholic Charities. The other piece is, as we've all kind of have new ways of working, that full staff is not there every single day. They're working remotely, and then they're coming in at certain times. So the building is available to them. I think it's like 9 to 6, and they come in, they're able to work, and they created their own schedule based on that. And like I say, you're not going to see as much activity over there right now because, again, you would walk over there and you would see like all these families and kids running around, especially just connected to some of the activities that Catholic Charities was working on, and those are not happening right now.
I guess because, I just got a phone call prior to this meeting, a resident in the North End who, normally around this time that, there's a proliferation of turkeys and things given away. And I know that the family center there was a critical piece. This person lives, I think, on Cleveland and would normally go to Parker. And she was told that they're not seeing anyone. But you're saying they are seeing folks, but it's just based on appointment, right?
Yeah, they have to do an appointment, and my understanding was that was working. I hadn't had anything new come to me about it. But if someone says that they're there to see somebody and by appointment to Catholic Charities, they're able to go. And I know that, like for example, we are still doing things that are outside of our building. So for example, they're having the Bag of Blessings at Parker. And it's funny, just timely, because I have a copy of the flyer as I'm speaking to you. It's actually tomorrow from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. And they're giving out bags that contain turkeys and traditional holiday food items. So things that have continued outside of our building. We also did that with like a drive-through it wasn't a health fair, but it was like a drive-through fair with the mammogram bus being there. Some other earlier on where it was some like thermometer giveaways connected to some other food. So those things have continued, but it definitely, I mean, it's different. It's just being straightforward. It is very different. I mean, for example, our health fair last year, we had over 500 people there in the building having a great time. All of our partners, including Catholic Charities, our parents, it was amazing. We were able to have our book fair where we gave out like sold those 40,000 books over at Parker. We're used to having our turkey giveaway over at Arroyo. We're already having conversations of usually between like Three Kings Day, there's a big celebration at Arroyo. Usually, how is that going to impact families and some of the other dinners we have for in partnership with our homeless shelters, et cetera. So it definitely looks very, very different. But when we do have the opportunities to kind of act as a host site, and especially if they can be done primarily outdoors, we definitely try to support that. And we usually have, well, not usually, we do. We have our people there to help set up, bring out tables and chairs. Our bathrooms obviously are available for somebody, needs to use a bathroom for some reason, et cetera. So we are trying to do that. Arroyo is a little bit more complicated right now because what we try to do is be smart about how we're doing the traffic. And of course, with testing even picking up right now, like I said, it's a little bit more complicated at Arroyo. So you're seeing a lot of things divert to Parker, but the few things I mentioned are the things that usually we're at Parker. And like I said, we have to figure some other things out soon about Arroyo.
So for this mom, this bag of blessings, and this is the last question, unless Councilwoman Bermudez, the bag of blessings, do you have to register or do you just stay in your car and pull up at Parker? How does that work? I just want to get this.
Yeah, this one, so they come outside, and I don't know if it's a drive-through as much as they're giving them out like this is not on the flyer. What I was told is they're going to flip up their trunks and all the bags are ready to be given out, and they're going to hand them so people can walk up and quickly get their bag. I do not see that you have to register early or anything like that. I'm trying to see if I have. I'll actually share this flyer with you both.
Please.
And the contact for this is Stack Williams, and his phone number 860-249-1040. He has it on the flyer, so I feel okay giving it out.
Yes, I know Stack, tremendous guy doing a lot
perfect. So yes. I'll share this flyer with you both.
Thank you so much. Councilwoman Bermudez, any last questions?
I don't. Thank you so much for the presentations tonight. Really, really wonderful presentations.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Director, for all your efforts during this time and the support for the youth in our community. It's so sorely needed, and I felt like it was important that we get this message out to the community so that they're aware of all the efforts the city's doing, and you're at the lead doing that. So thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome, and I will make sure to get you the follow-ups very soon.
Thank you so much. All right. Have a good evening, guys.